This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. Hey, what's up, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from the week and answer them here in video format. There's a ton of things to get into, but if you want to make sure your question can be heard on this show, make sure that you're subscribed and notified when I drop the question prompts on the community tab so that you can be able to check it out. And leave your question there. But without further ado, let's jump into it. We're going to start with Kirko Chain, who has this question for me right here. How will the change to Mike Rutenberg affect the defense, and how will the defense differ from what Jim Schwartz ran? I think there's two questions that need to be answered now simultaneously because of the trade of Myles Garrett. And I think that's going to define the change in the defensive structure more than the change of defensive coordinator, right? So when Myles was here and the Browns went from Jim Schwartz to Mike Rutenberg, and the only thing that changed was defensive coordinator, the memorandum from the Cleveland Browns was that nothing's going to change, basically. We're going to keep the same stuff. He knows the same stuff that Jim Schwartz did. We're basically replacing Jim Schwartz with younger Jim Schwartz was the messaging around Mike Rutenberg. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I definitely have noticed that messaging has changed since the Myles Garrett trade. The reason that is simple. You're not going to run the same defense that you ran successfully with Myles Garrett without Myles Garrett. He's just that good of a player, right? We're talking about somebody who is the sun to the universe that the Browns defense wants to exist into. He's the gravity that everything on the defense rotated around. You get rid of that piece, the gravity, literally in your defense, right? Where everybody has their attention focused to, where everything in the play is going to be designed to stop. And you take that player out for somebody who's good, but doesn't have the gravity of a Myles Garrett in Jared Verse. It's going to have to be a different defense. So you're going to have to do a lot of different things. It'd be like if you went to 2002 and you replaced Shaquille O'Neal with Jermaine O'Neal. And Jermaine O'Neal is a good player, one of my favorite players growing up. But you're not going to run the same triangle that you ran with Shaq with Jermaine O'Neal, right? He just doesn't have the gravity that a prime Shaq does. So I think that's going to be the marker in the difference for the defense, is that now you do not have Myles Garrett on that defense. You cannot rely on that gravity. You can't rely on the ball coming out as quickly. You can't rely on teams being afraid of that piece in the same way that they were afraid of that guy. It's just a different beast. So now what Mike Rutenberg's going to have to incorporate into this defense is stuff that we really haven't had to see the Browns have to resort to, right? A lot more stunts, a lot more twists, a lot more shenanigans to get pressure, right? You're going to have to send linebackers more often, which means you're going to have to leave guys in space a little bit more, right? You're going to have to kind of get the pass rush by committee, which means safety blitzes, DB blitzes, right? For the most part, the Browns defense has been able to get by under Jim Schwartz with a basic philosophy of just rushing your front four and occasionally dialing up a sim pressure where you're still only rushing four, you're just changing the four guys who are rushing. Now the Browns are going to have to blitz more often. They can't just rely on their front four to create the kind of gravity and pressure that they might have when they had an all-time great player on that defensive line at the most important position. So Mike Rutenberg, the defense is going to be more scheme dependent. With Mike Rutenberg, they're going to need their defensive coordinator to support them a little bit more. Jim Schwartz had an easy job in Cleveland. His job was basically to get out of the way and let Myles cook. Mike Rutenberg's going to have to cook up a scheme here that's going to have to get on top of some of these offenses. So he's going to have to dial up more sim pressure. He's going to have to dial up more diverse blitz packages. He's going to have to get DBs and linebackers and corners involved and safeties involved in the blitzing, of this, right? I would imagine Emmanuel McNeil-Warren becomes a big part of this, right? Carson Schlesinger and Quincy Williams, he becomes a big part of this. And that's what changes now. It's still going to be attacking. I don't know if they're going to be set out as wide now that they're not as bendy at the edges. Like, that's another thing to consider. You could be wide 9 with Myles Garrett because Myles Garrett has incredible bend and strength. So you're not really creating giant holes in your all defensive line because Myles Garrett's bend is able to close that area. Now you have Jared Verse, who's not bendy, right? So you don't really want him out there on the island on like downs where you're not sure if you're going to see a runner pass. Like if it's not a definite pass down, that could create some problems there for your defensive line. So yeah, Mike Rutenberg is going to be put to more of a test as far as his ability to coordinate this defense than Jim Schwartz ever was. And I think that's going to be the difference. Not necessarily the difference between Jim Schwartz and Mike Rutenberg, but the difference in difficulty of the job now that Mike Rutenberg has to do this with expectations to still be a top 8 defense in his first year without Myles Garrett, which was the easy button. And Jim Schwartz was able to just kind of run the easy button. So it's going to have to be more complex. It's going to have to be more thought out. Doesn't mean it's an impossible job. It could be done. But just got to be realistic about the track that's in front of Mike Rutenberg to be able to reach his goals for this season. It's significantly different than what it was for Jim Schwartz since 2023. The next question comes from Ken. Okay, I'm going to just put nerd because I don't know what you got going on before that. Hey, Q, what's your favorite Browns memory in my lifetime? Mine would be 2020 playoff game versus the Steelers. Was watching it with a few Browns and a Steeler fan. As soon as that opening snap went over Ben's head, fans sat there with the 1,000-yard stare for the rest of the game. I mean, like, it almost has to be that game, 2020, because that game, the 2020 playoff game, for a Browns fan who grew up with just the expansion Browns and really started to come of age, right? Like, I was 5 when the Browns came back, really started to form memories of actually like rooting for the Browns in like 05, right? You know what I mean? Like 05, 06. And that's firmly in the Tomlin Roethlisberger era, right? Like that's exactly where that was. So to watch the Browns be the first team to really dismantle that image that people had of the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? There was a question of whether the Steelers were still going to be that great of a team. At that point, right, they had lost to the Jaguars. They had a couple of embarrassing playoff losses up to that point. The playoff streak had started for them, but it wasn't a thing yet for Pittsburgh before that game. And people had assumed, they're playing the Browns. The Steelers won the division. Like, they're back to being the Steelers. And then the Browns did that to them, and that was it. Like, that was the last time people really thought of the Steelers as like a actual contender. After that, their first round bounces pretty consistently. And to do that in Pittsburgh, where I've seen the Browns get traumatized the most, to Big Ben, to see Big Ben cry after losing that game. That's gonna, like, the Browns could win a Super Bowl and that game is still gonna be in my top 5. You know what I mean? Like, it's not in the top 5 because it's sad and the Browns don't have anything that could be like, that's a legitimate top 5 moment in any sports fan's life, is watching a team that terrorized you for 20 years. Specifically Big Ben, who terrorized you for 20 years. It all come apart for him finally. Like, that was the comeuppance for 20 years of bullshit dealing with the Pittsburgh Steelers and how they always get away with it. And it was like, they finally got caught and it was us who got them. Oh man, the Schadenfreude from that game, just amazing. Just amazing. I mean, it felt even better in the moment because you thought that the Browns were about to take a rocket ship straight to competing for championships. Obviously, that didn't happen, but even without that, dude, beating the Pittsburgh Steelers like that on NBC in front of 55 million people, according to Nielsen records, watching Big Ben cry in front of those 55 million people, and kind of the aura of the Pittsburgh Steelers being washed away in one game. I mean, that will never go away. That will never not be an amazing moment. And that will never not be in my top five. Even if the Browns could win 5 Super Bowls, you know what I mean? That moment's still going to be in my top 5. I don't care. The Browns could become the next dynasty in sports and have all these great moments. That right there, somebody who lived through it, that game, that means something to me. Obviously, winning a Super Bowl would be more important, but, you know, if we won 4, I still would probably value that win over a 5th Super Bowl appearance in my lifetime. You know what I mean? But yeah, that game right there, that's going to be a top 5 moment for me forever, no matter what the Browns do. And that's got to be my favorite moment as a Browns fan. Like, it's not even close. I watched that game with my brother and my dad too, just before I was streaming the games. I think that's the last game my dad and my brother, they're not passed away. Like, we can still watch games together. So don't feel bad for me or anything. But that was the last game that we got to watch together, because after that I moved, and, you know, everybody's life kind of went different ways. And also I started streaming those games, you know what I mean? So can't really be with the family and watch the games as much. But yeah, that was top 5 Browns moment of my lifetime. And I don't think anything's going to take it out of the top 5 ever. Trent Gaming says, how much production do you think Dylan Sampson will get this year? For some reason, I think of him having a peak Duke Johnson type year. Duke Johnson's a good comp for Dylan Sampson. I think there's a lot there similar to those two. Duke was a little bit more developed coming out of Miami than Dylan was, but I think Dylan has the same kind of explosiveness. And there was this thing that Duke Johnson had where, like, yeah, he was a good athlete, he was good receiving, but he was harder to take down than I think people thought to tackle. And Dylan Sampson also has that. So I like that comp for Dylan Sampson. I think that that's not crazy. We're going to continue, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game is going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. Okay, we're back, and this is a question from Cleve Ray, who says this. Do you think Denzel Ward gets moved by the trade deadline simply because the front office is all in on this year's draft at QB, or do you think that it could be a scenario where the defense is capable of being top 10 defense and we move Denzel simply because this year's upcoming draft, Andrew goes for after QB and cornerback in the first few rounds? So I get what you're saying. I don't think it's crazy. I can see the Browns deciding to trade Denzel Ward for some draft assets, or deciding to trade Denzel Ward because they think they're going to replace him with a corner in a late first, or what we assume to be a late first. But I don't know, man. Like, I just don't. If the Browns are planning on being good in 2027 and 2028, right, which if this is following a 5-year plan hierarchy, this is usually where you start to want to be good in 2027, 2028. Why can't Denzel Ward be a part of that? Like, doesn't that make your life easier than trying to get a 3rd-round pick for Denzel Ward and try to turn that in? Like, sometimes watching the Browns is like watching a seesaw, because we keep doing things. It's like, yeah, if we get this piece from this trade, it'll make it better, but like we're making things worse on another side. So like we end up taking a team that was like this and then just teetering it like that, and then we teeter back and we teeter forth, and it's just like watching a seesaw go back and forth. I get it. You can get draft picks for Denzel Ward, but like I think Denzel Ward could be better than a third-round pick for the next couple of years, because if you think about it, how many third-round picks have the Browns taken that haven't contributed to anything for over a year or two? I think Denzel Ward might be a good player for the next 3 years. You know, is that not more worth it than like medium draft assets? You know? So, yeah, I get it, but I just think the Browns and like football people in general overvalue getting rid of good players for draft assets. I really do. I think that we overvalue these draft assets. We overvalue what they could mean, and we get lost in the copium and hopium of what you could get back for those picks. But reality, usually when you trade a good player for, you know, middling compensation, you don't end up on the better end of that deal. Like, this is how we get Randy Moss getting traded to the Patriots for a 5th-round pick. Like, talent is valued at such a low rate compared to draft comps that I can't believe it's something that we still do. You know what I mean? Like, you could get Myles Garrett, and all it costs you is a 1st-round and a 2nd-round pick. Oh, in you know, other years, and then trading a player who plays the exact same position that you're replacing him with than Myles Garrett. Like, we don't value talent enough, and we overvalue front office's ability to find talent. You know, I have done enough scouting adjacent work on this channel to understand that even if you know what you're talking about and you work really, really hard, and I'm not just talking from my experience, I'm talking to people who actually like work in scouting, it's still not the guarantee people want it to be with the draft. So, you know, when you know you got a gem in Denzel Ward, I'd rather just wait that one out. You know, if Denzel Ward gets bad and we don't get anything back for it, fine. Like, what were we going to do with a 4th-round pick for Denzel Ward? You know, I'd rather take that chance on Denzel. I'd rather take chances on players to age well than trying to take chances on 4th and 5th-round picks. You know what I mean? That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe the future will tell me that I'm wrong, and if I am, you know, I'll take that information and roll with it. But every year we're just talking about trading good players for draft picks, and then we draft good players, and then 7 years later we're talking about trading those players for draft picks. You know what I mean? Like, at some point I would like to be at a place, or at some point I would like to try to just like keep these players. Big Griff says, hey, Q, love the videos. How do you think targets are going to be split within the receiving room? Browns are going to be such a run-heavy team, having Fannin, Sampson likely taking a lot of targeted passes, and feel like a few of the receivers might kind of be left behind in the offense. This is an interesting question, right? Because Harold Fannin's probably going to get over 100 targets. And you have to imagine that there's like, if we're doing a 50-50 split, about 1,000 snaps on offense a year, 50 rushing attempts, 50 dropbacks, right? Not 50, 500 rushing attempts, 500 dropbacks. So if you're splitting it that way, 100 of those automatically go to Harold Fannin, if not more. We're probably talking about 80 targets. I know people don't like to hear it, but you're probably talking about 80 targets to Jerry Jeudy. He's still very important. You're probably talking about 120 targets combined between the two rookies, so 60 targets each. There. So we're at 120, 80. We're already at 300 targets. Between all of the running backs combined, we're probably talking about another 80 targets. So now we're at 380 targets, got 120 targets left between everybody else. So that's probably how it's going to break down just off the top of my head. It's just napkin math. But you have to imagine Fannon's going to get 100. If that's the target split, then you're probably giving 50 more targets to Harold Fannin and 20 more targets to Jerry Jeudy. So whatever that ends up being, and then the rest of those targets can be split between everybody. Isaiah Bond has to get targets too. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's probably like 50 targets for Isaiah Bond in there too. I think I'm at a 500. That's probably too tight. So probably 120. And then give 30 targets to just be spread around everybody else. So 120 for Harold Fannin, and then spread those targets out for anybody else. If anybody followed that, please tell me the math that was actually done, because in my head, I think I got about 470 targets out the way and then 30 left for charity for the Browns receiving room. Tell me if I'm right about that, because I'm pretty sure I'm not. But yeah, I think that's where we're at, but y'all tell me. Son of the Sun says this: what metric will Shedeur have to meet to stay the starter, or for the Browns not to draft a QB in the first round next year? Will Sanders be judged off wins, stats, or spark the offense? What metric would Shedeur have to reach? That's a hard one, because I don't think there's like a specific metric that's going to be able to, like, we say, oh, he gets this, he's fine, right? I think what you're going to have to see for him to be the starter and stay the starter, and I'm assuming that's a different thing from like Shedeur not just being the starter, but also like preventing the Browns from drafting a quarterback, right? Like those are two different things. If you want Shedeur to stay the starter next year, but the Browns still might draft the quarterback, Jacoby Brissett. You have to feel about Shedeur the same way we felt about Jacoby Brissett, right? That will be good enough to start next year. It won't stop the Browns from drafting a quarterback, but it would be good enough to start next year without question, right? So that would be kind of like the general vibe that you would have to feel. You have to feel similar to Shedeur that you felt about Jacoby Brissett when he was here, which is, hey, he's made some plays. He's not turning the ball over. He's playing good situational football. We can win games with him if we're good enough around him. And that'd be good enough for him to keep the job. Browns still might draft the quarterback. If we're talking about what Shedeur has to do to stop the Browns from drafting a quarterback, he has to be undeniably good. Like, he has to be, like, undeniably one of the 12 best quarterbacks in football. If he's that, then I think that would stop the Browns from drafting a quarterback. But it's hard to say what metric would say that, right? Or what metric means this, that, and the third. It's just going to have to be something that we take the data in, we take what we're seeing on film in, but we also have to take how we feel when we watch it to regard to. So that's my best answer for you. JMO216 says this: Big Dog, do you think Schlesinger will have a sophomore slump? He got banged up pretty good towards the end of the last season. Pretty sure he sat out the last game. Do you think he will still be used in coverage as much as he was in a rookie? Yeah, I think when I talk to people, two positions pop up that people are worried about because of how the defense is going to have to change because they no longer have Myles. There's corner, which I'm more worried about. And then other people have floated the idea of linebacker being an issue. One, tight ends, right? Now, Jared Verse is still going to take up a double team here and there. I'm not going to say he's not going to be double teamed. But the amount of effort, attention, and double teams that Myles saw last year compared to what Jared Verse is going to see is going to be marginal, right? Like, there's going to be a significant difference of double teams a lack of double teams that we see. Now, what does that mean? And why does that mean that people are worried about linebacker? Well, if you're seeing less double teams on the defensive line, that means tight ends are getting free releases off the line of scrimmage, which means they're more of a threat to be able to be receivers, which puts more pressure on your linebackers and your safeties to be able to cover them effectively. Now, I feel good about Grant Delpit covering tight ends. I feel good about Emmanuel McNeil, Warren covering tight ends. And I feel good about Carson Schlesinger covering tight ends. Not sure about Quincy Williams, but I'm pretty sure Quincy Williams' job is going to be to blitz a lot at that linebacker position. Another thing that could potentially affect Carson Schlesinger in year two is that they are going to be blitzing linebackers more. So you combine the fact that they're blitzing linebackers more, which means there's less linebackers back to cover, and that tight ends are going to have more free releases against the Browns now. And you can start to see how that adds up. So certainly there's going to be a lot more on his plate in his sophomore year than his rookie year. I think he's a good enough player to be able to handle that, but I could see a point to where that becomes a little overwhelming for him at the season, and he has to adjust, or the Browns have to adjust on what they want to do with him. So it's certainly something to think about. Cam's Cutups says this. I know we mentioned it before, but the Browns will have to develop their QB. Do you think the loss of Myles will, A, greatly affect the defense's point to where it won't be a crutch for a young quarterback, and B, make it so that the level of QB we have to pursue is higher in order to compensate? This is my greatest fear, and ultimately why I was on team force Myles to stay, right? It's not a popular take. I understand people didn't like it. They want Myles to go where he's happy, whatever. I'm on team you force Myles to stay here because that right there. And that right there is the plan to solve quarterback. And for me, the draft compensation you got back from Myles did not make it easier to find a solution at quarterback than maybe it could have been if you just had Myles on the team. Because if you have Myles on the team, you have something that you can put the entire structure of the team on and lean it on the defense. You have a giant crutch for a young quarterback to lean on. And the fact that the Browns never utilized that crutch with a young quarterback that they actually believe to take over the franchise is a giant missed opportunity. Because that's what Myles provided you. That's why he's worth the money on top of everything else that he did defensively, is that, hey, you know that your defense is going to be able to be relied upon to a point to where you can have young quarterback play out there and still have a chance to win games. Now that becomes a lot more difficult because, yeah, the Browns defense is going to be good, but is it going to be able to be a crutch good for a young quarterback? I don't know. We got to see them play, but I doubt it. They were barely there with Myles Garrett. Without Myles, I assume they get worse. They're probably not going to be to that point. And that, for me, is why I was just against the idea of trading Myles. Because I did want to draft a quarterback in 2027. And I felt like in order for that quarterback to be successful, the Browns need to build as much margin of error for that quarterback as possible. And I don't think you build more margin of error for that quarterback by trading Myles Garrett. I understand there are arguments for it. I don't agree with those arguments, right? I think having Myles on that defense creates a giant margin of error for your quarterback. And maybe if we had gotten more draft compensation than what we got, I'd be more for it because it makes the probability of getting one much higher. But what we got, I don't really think moves the needle enough for me to be okay with trading Myles. So, yeah, that's my biggest fear with this whole thing, is that it makes the defense just bad enough that it affects the quarterback play, it affects quarterback development, and it kind of messes everything up, right? We talked about this in my video with JP. The Browns are trying to build a team that can win without a quarterback, but they just traded the most important player who can make a plan like that work, which is Myles Garrett, right? So it's like mixed signals. So, yeah, I worry about that. And then I worry that we end up with the Baker situation, which ironically enough did happen with Myles on the roster. So there is that. You know, I'm not going to act like my ideas are infallible. There's certainly holes you can poke in them, and, you know, things that can make you go different directions as far as belief. But this is just what I think. But, yeah, it kind of makes you end up in a Baker situation where it's like Baker was good, but he wasn't good enough to take the Browns where they needed to. So the Browns did something desperate and moved for Deshaun Watson, and then that blew up in their face. I'm just concerned because of my entire history watching and rooting for the Cleveland Browns tells me trading a guy like Myles Garrett just usually doesn't end well for us. MeWit says this, hey Q, my question is sadly no longer Browns related, but how do you see Myles' season and metrics compared to last? We talked about Myles a lot in this video. You guys are asking a lot about Myles or things that are adjacent to him. He has an offense for the first time in years. He'd be better, but the literal best year of the NFL last season. The D isn't built around complimenting him like it was in Cleveland the last years, ending on some hopium. I hope he gets his Super Bowls, and then like LeBron brings a championship back here with us. Yeah, me too. It's going to be interesting, right? Because that defensive line is still pretty good, right? Byron Young had double-digit sacks last year. Braden Fisk. They got some pieces on that defensive line. It's definitely a little different, but it's Myles Garrett, and the Rams are going to be able to force teams to pass the ball more than the Browns were. So I could see where Myles doesn't necessarily recreate the production that he had last year, but maybe the efficiency and advanced metrics are even better than they were last season because he's not asked to do as much for the overall team to win. That's my guess. But I think that he has a year left in him whenever it happens where he's going to get 25 sacks. I said that before he got traded. I'll say that after. I think he's eventually going to get 25 in the season and break his own record. That's just on the kind of pace he was on. But, yeah, wish the best for him. But, we don't got him no more. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.